Welcome back to CEO Money. It's Ed Baxter sitting in for Michael Yorba. Joining us right now is David Reifsnyder, Chief Operating Officer of Hybrid Power Systems. Welcome to the show, David.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I can't complain. David, what's interesting about when I look at you guys' website and a few other things is that I'm a big fan of symphony, and when you think about the coordination and the direction of things and people who are very good at it, the term that comes to mind is Maestro. Talk to us a little bit about hybrid power systems and how you guys perform that Maestro-like activity when it comes to solar.
Sure. Well, so the company's Hybridyne, but I get that right
Okay.
just to start with, Hybridyne Power Systems. And we chose the name Maestro because obviously it's an orchestra reference, and that's what we felt was appropriate for what we're doing with a solar array. Solar arrays today are installed as basically static architectures. They're hardwired, and they are expected to do their work in that format only. And what we do with Maestro is we actually change the game. We make it a dynamic structure instead of a static structure, and we choreograph that so that it's in line with the circumstances which prevail at the time. So depending on what the sun's doing, whether it's early in the day, middle of the day, late in the day, cloud-covered, raining, snow-covered, etc., all those different circumstances are going to change the way that that system would operate. And Maestro understands that and orchestrates the system so it produces the maximum amount of power that it possibly can in all of those situations.
Well, having built a solar, I guess for lack of a small solar plant myself, it's interesting that none of the things we did back then were even remotely close to what Maestro does when it comes to managing the process, optimizing the process, and doing so in a much more efficient manner than we actually had, because I have personal experience with this problem myself. Tell us a bit about the product itself. I mean, to the extent that you can, in Hybridyne Power Systems. I mean, what do you guys really bring into the market?
Sure. Well, Maestro, it's the culmination of years of research and patent development, product development, field testing, and so forth. And basically, Maestro is our newest, and it's our most cost-effective solution for optimizing the power yield from a solar array. And what we do is we solve the biggest problem. It's one that every power PV installation suffers from. They're all hardwired.
Right.
And as I mentioned, these panel string configurations are all fixed regardless of the amount of sunlight that's available throughout the day. They are configured to, from the point that they're installed, that's their configuration. So there are many times at which that fixed configuration doesn't generate enough voltage to turn on the inverter. And that's because inverters have what's referred to as a startup voltage. That's about a half of the rated voltage for the inverter. So if it's a 600-volt inverter, it requires 300 volts. That's 500 volts for a 1,000-volt inverter, and so on. And Maestro solves that problem by replacing all of the hardwired parallel string connections that are string to string with switches and logic that allows these connections to be made in series. And whenever the voltage drops to a level that would cause the inverter to turn off.
Okay.
So this is key because no power is produced when the inverter is off, right?
This is true.
If you think about it, you've got a system that's either active when it's got enough power to exceed the threshold, or inactive when it doesn't. So that's the primary problem to address. The other advantage is there's a common practice that's called over-paneling an array.
True.
And this is typically 30 to 40% of the number of panels that are equal to the rated power rating are added in an attempt to balance or increase that system's output. And that's really, frankly, a pretty expensive way to try to achieve additional yield. And again, it's because it's a fixed architecture.
It is expensive, and it's also time-consuming, and it takes the project a different. When we did ours, obviously we kind of overbid ours too, and it is a pretty common thing. When you look at that particular market, I guess kind of a two-part question here: how big is it, and how quickly you guys expect to start attacking it?
Sure. Well, the market's really huge. If you just looked at the forecast growth in utility PV over the next 5 years, the prediction's about 45 gigawatts. And then if you consider how much PV is already installed on, this is globally, the planet, there's about 200 gigawatts installed globally. So if you just considered about 10 cents a watt, which is approximately where Maestro might fall, probably decrease over time, but when we hit the market, we'll probably come in at around that level. That's about a $4.5 billion market for new systems, and at least that much for installed systems.
Well, that brings up a totally different question there, in the sense that that was my next question. You know, would Maestro be available for existing PV arrays where you had people like me who weren't near as smart as you who built them? You know, can you add this technology to an existing PV array?
Absolutely. It's a big opportunity for us. We're agnostic to what's referred to as the balance of system components. So when you look at everything that goes into a solar array, the panels, the inverters, et cetera, we don't require a specific hardware architecture to play. A lot of systems do. We don't require any field rewiring, so we use the wiring as it's installed in the field today. It's a very simple upgrade path, and we do anticipate a pretty healthy interest, at least equal to the new or greenfield installations. I think there's going to be a ton of interest on the retrofit side. Well,
the ability to manage that in a much more efficient manner than we actually did, obviously, is something that, I mean, we sold our excess power to SoCal Edison when we did our deal, but we only had the excess when we had, you know, pretty good sunny days and so on, and so we weren't in a position where we could depend on that particular revenue. As you move forward and you deploy this particular project, will it be something that you'll manage on behalf of the power systems, or will you sell it to them as a standalone, or how do you expect that business model to work out?
That's a great question. We have a couple different strategy and revenue models. I would say initially and out of the box, we have a number of relationships with EPCs. Those are the companies that basically pull these projects together and build them. They're very interested in this technology. Obviously, they'd love to improve their pitch to the stakeholders. And I haven't said it yet, but I can tell you that we typically can increase the power that's available from an array by a pretty staggering amount. And this is somewhere, depending on where you are geographically. Up here where I am in the Northeast, we've seen the numbers typically be in the 35 to 40% area. And let's say in the Southwest, which has a different climate, you might see something like 25%.
Different climate would be an understatement. You know, David, we have about 30 seconds or so left here.
Yeah.
If people are interested in learning more about Hybridyne, either as a company or as an opportunity, how do they do that?
We would suggest to go to our website. It's Hybridyne, that's spelled HYBRIDYNE.net. And all the information they'd want to see about how to contact us is right there on the website.
Perfect. David, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate you. I look forward to watching this particular system roll out and make our solar arrays, even our own, much more efficient. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our segment producer, our sponsor for this segment was our title sponsor, Tycon Partners. We'd also like to thank our other sponsors, Ogletree Financial, Legal Shield, Lots of Yachts, and Infuse, creator of the first video CRM. We'll be back tomorrow with more great content. Thank you for joining us.